Hello, fellow seekers. This is Amanda Artemisa Forrester, rune reader, diviner, and polytheist mystic. Welcome back to my channel. I'm sorry for the bad angle here. I'm filming on my phone in my room. What I'm going to do today is review a book, which is pretty interesting, I think. I breezed through this in a few days. Well, okay, I breezed through it in a few days when I actually had enough time to read it, because I actually bought it at the end of last semester, and so I didn't have enough time to sit down and read it until the end of the semester. When I actually had time to read it, then it only took me a couple days. But for the last few weeks, yeah, not really. Anyway, this is called Winter, from the Great Wheel, Rituals to Thrive in the Dark Cycle of the Saeculum by Joe Graham. Now, this is, if you are at all familiar with the Wheel of the Year in Wiccan type of way of thinking, this, I'm trying to explain this. This is kind of the same thing, but expanded outward into 80-year cycles that humanity goes through. She also refers to another book, which I did, of course, buy because that's how good this was, but I have not read the other one. She refers to each generation going through these cycles. I don't know if you've heard the term, the phrase, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times. This actually comes from a post-apocalyptic novel called Those Who Remain. However, that little rhyme or phrase or whatever you want to call it, it's actually been going around on memes, and it's actually somewhat relevant. It makes a lot of sense if you think about it. And anyway, she uses a cycle that she got from Stoic philosophy. When I read this, I wasn't sure if it was entirely accurate, because although I like Stoic philosophy, it is not my expertise when it comes to classical religion. So I didn't know for sure how historical it was, but I did some research, and it appears to be correct. It appears to be a legit thing. Every 80 years, we pass through what the classical Greeks called apostasis, a destruction by fire that then allows for rebirth and the growth of new things. This is not like the Christian concept of apocalypse, which is about disasters that signify the end of the world. Apostasis is the mechanism by which the world begins anew. Now, if you think about it, 80 years ago, roughly, was World War II. 80 years before that was the Civil War in America. And 80 years before that was the American Revolutionary War. She has all this laid out. And she has a lot of this better worked out than me. And it's actually really fascinating and pretty convincing. And she also, I'm going to show you some charts. She talks about the different, okay, this is a little derogatory, but a while back there was that whole okay boomer meme, you know, when people would just dismiss what boomers would say. But in a way, it's also understandable because they grew up in a different generation. Their context of the world was different. And every generation, their context of the world is different, because the world changes with each generation. We make an impact on the world, and it changes. And then everybody complains about the next generation not. I mean, we have Socrates, people from Athens and Socrates' time complaining about the youth today being lazy and, disrespectful and impious, not respecting their elders. That's apparently just a trait of youth in general. That's something that they've been complaining about for 2,000 years. Anyway, so what's going on right now is we are in a crisis point in history. And now back to what she calls this a cultural winter. I'm sorry, I don't know what just happened, but something has my dogs going. We are in a cultural crisis point. And she overlays the standard Wheel of the Year with Imbolc and the solstices and all that over an 80-year cycle. And you can see that I've written that in roughly 2000 was 9/11, right? And that was when we started to descend into our cultural crisis. And for those of us who came of age around 9/11, all we've ever known is a darkening world. This sounds depressing, but to me this book was actually really hopeful. Because I was around 13 when 9/11 happened, and I will never forget walking into my social studies class and seeing my teacher crying. And my father came to school, because we didn't know what was going on at the time, of course, to get me and to my brother's school to get my brother and to take us home, because we didn't know if there were going to be more attacks. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't know if America was going to be at war. And of course we are at war, but, our society pretends we're not at war, which is actually, in a way, pretty much worse than all the other wars we've ever fought. We kind of pretend we're not. But we've had a 20-year war going on. That's kind of fucked up. So that happened when I was 13. And that would be Samhain, the descent into the underworld, descent into winter. The cultural winter. And then the winter solstice, the darkest point of the year, or the darkest point of this 80-year cycle, would have been 2010. But because the longer the cycle, the less exact it is. I would say it was probably more like the recession in 2008. And here's what's crazy about this. This book was published in 2020. Not one mention of COVID. And the whole thing is so prescient and talking about about crisis points and how we don't know how this cultural crisis is going to hit us. I had to look up the date. It was January 10th, 2020 was when this book was published. So she had to have been working on this all year in 2019. And so this sounds awful, but if you lay the pandemic over Imbolc, that actually means that we're coming to our cultural spring equinox pretty soon in 2030. Now, I know that's 8 years away. That's 8 years away. That sounds awful. But for those like me who have only seen the world get worse and worse and worse as we've grown up, this is actually hope that we can pull out of it. We've seen the world just But we've just seen the world be destroyed with climate change and everything else, and then with lockdown, all the water cleared up and the air cleared up after a couple months. To me, this book is hopeful. It actually shows you how to work through this. It's also, weirdly enough, a lot about ancestor work. I had more notes, but now I can't find them. There's a lot in here. So, '80-year cycles, and all this civil unrest that we're going through. This is something else that we've gone through this before. The French Revolution too was also on one of these 80-year cycle points. I can't wait to read this Generations book. They even projected into the future to 2069, although obviously that's a guess. These guys, William Strauss and Neil Howe, so he refers to this quite a bit. They're sociologists. But, man, this is just really incredible stuff. And I want to read a few things. It's tempting to think that if we could go back, cultural winter, like this crisis, could have been prevented. What if Al Gore had become president in 2001? What if there had been no Iraq war? What if somehow September 11th had never happened? It's important to remember that winter is a natural part of the turning seasons of the Saeculum. Specific events may or may not happen, just as the weather on a particular day in January may vary, but winter as a season is inevitable. Why does winter come? According to the sociologists William Strauss and Neil Howe, winter comes when the generational cycle reaches a certain point. When what they call idealist generations, like the baby boomers, gain institutional control and power. The deep and painful rifts in that generation were manifest in 1970, but because of the greatest generation and the silent generation control of institutions and of the power positions in government, finance, industry, and media, those conflicts were kept tempered. Through the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s, slow and deliberate elders pushed compromise and bipartisanship to left and right, whether they sought to stymie the Democratic Watergate babies or Newt Gingrich's Republican Revolution. Eventually, they weren't there anymore. To better understand what happened, let's tell a story. And she does this a lot. There's a lot of stories in here. Like, there's a lot of ancestor work stuff. This one is fictional. But this one, she's got a story in here about two brothers that she calls Bob and Frank. And they grow up and one goes to a good university, one goes to Vietnam. And they basically, their lives diverge. They both get married and have children. But it ends with their children, both their daughters, even having saying, do we have to be enemies on a Facebook? Like generations later, do we have to be enemies on a Facebook post? Whoever it was, the other one didn't answer, but she didn't block her either. This is how we got here. Our bitter internal wars aren't wars between different tribes. They're literally brother against brother. The bottom line is that Bob and Frank, in all their manifestations in society, want to punish each other. They want to hurt each other. They want to avenge a lifetime of injuries. Can Bob and Frank be reconciled? Can Allison and Karen find common ground? Or do they simply fight their father's wars? History suggests that Bob and Frank won't reconcile. Osiris and Set, Abel and Cain, the oldest stories tell us that this will end when one of them is dead. This is the furnace that fuels the crisis, the war between brothers. Mystic, in its scope and as personal as Bob and Frank. This is what makes winter come. The brothers each call their army to them, and they fight until one or the other is annihilated. They use their power as older men, as leaders in society, to clash with one another. It's not actually about others at all, any more than Set and Osiris is about the government of Egypt, or Abel and Cain is about proper ways to worship. It's about punishing the one you know best. It's fratricide. Can that class be prevented? Probably not. Can its outcome be altered? Absurdly. How this crisis ends rests not with Bob and Frank, but with Allison and Karen. They are the ones who decide what happens ultimately, and how the winners and losers treat each other in larger society. The people who decide what happens going forward after Bob and Frank are Allison and Karen. Bob and Frank are a microcosm for what we call the culture wars. There's rituals in here because this one is written for pagans, and these are rituals for how you can survive the winter. Again, these are rituals for how you cultural winter, because this, unfortunately, as much as I'd like the pandemic to be over, and I am going into healthcare, the pandemic's probably going to last for much longer. Please get vaccinated. I know a lot of people watching me are probably hippies, and that's okay. Please get vaccinated. Anyway, the thing that I would really like to talk about here is choosing your role. She's got a scenario, and I'm going to read it to you. You're in a museum. It's a crowded weekend afternoon, and the exhibit spaces are full of tourists and locals alike viewing the art and artifacts. Suddenly, there's a bang. You turn around, and you see flames and broken glass around one of the exhibit areas. People are screaming. There's blood on the floor, people stampeding in all directions. You see a man who seems to be holding 2 more Molotov cocktails. He turns and sprints into the next exhibit hall. What do you do? A. You pull out your phone and start filming. The world needs to know what is happening here today. B. You go after the man. Someone's got to take him down before he does any more harm. C. I try to help anyone who is injured. I get kids who don't seem to be with anyone to safety. Or D. I grab the priceless art treasures nearest the flame and carry them safely outside. All of these are useful and good responses to the crisis. Which one you thought would best describe your action tells you what your natural role is in the crisis era of winter. If you chose A, your natural role is communicator. People can't make good decisions without good information. People can't form good opinions without knowing the truth. If you chose B, your natural role is warrior. When threatened with physical danger, someone has to act physically to stop it, whether it's a bomber, an active shooter, or a natural disaster like a flood or hurricane. If you chose C, your natural role is helper. People are bleeding, kids are lost and screaming, and someone needs to step in to help the people who are in crisis. If you chose D, your natural role is conservator. Your job is to preserve treasures that are bigger than the present, or to conserve information, scientific, historic, and artistic, that otherwise might be destroyed. All of those things work together. Someone grabs the painting, and someone else grabs the screaming toddler, and both of them run out of the building. Someone goes after the guy with the Molotov cocktails, and someone films it so there's no misinformation about what happened. No one role is more important than the other. These team positions are supposed to play together harmoniously. Your role is defined not just by your temperament, but by your position in life and your skills. For example, I'm a warrior by temperament. Not me. That's this author, not me. That is the one I am least likely to do. And had the crisis era happened 30 years ago, nothing would have made me happier than to go after the guy with the Molotov cocktail. But I am 50-something and do not have the skills to go all diehard. Today, my actual skills are best served by being a helper. And obviously, I'm going into the medical field, so my skills definitely are at least somewhat the helper. But I'm also having a YouTube channel sharing this, so I've got some of the communicator in there. And I'm also reconstructing a pretty ancient pagan religion, so there's some conservator there too. I'd say I'm probably mostly the helper and the communicator, but the knowledge is probably my biggest trait or value, so I'm not sure which one I would pick, honestly. Realistically, if this happened, I would pick C. I would go for the kids first, as long as nobody was going after them. But I think in a large group situation, if a lot of people went after the kids, then I'd go for the art. So it really depends on how many people were already helping. But this is what's important to note. Note, there is not an option E. Run over everyone on your way out the door and save your own skin first. You're a hero. Heroes do not behave that way. There's also not an option F. Lie on the floor and scream until someone saves you. What if no one does? In a crisis era, you have to take some action, even if it's only being responsible for your own evacuation. So, that might have seemed a little bit random. For some reason, I do believe in prepping. I believe in thinking about the future. I've talked before on this channel about how I used to have, or I tried to have a homestead. I did have 5 acres in Missouri, and I wasn't a very successful homestead. It was 2 city kids really trying to make a homestead. One day I really would like to have a homestead again. But these are things that I think that we need to think about. And speaking about prepping, it also talks about what you would do if there was a refugee situation, and if you thought you could take somebody into your home, how many people you could shelter, like hurricane victims, planning for stuff like that, anything like that. It also relates back to the Depression. Every time there's a section where it talks about the future, it also talks about the past. It talks about stories from the Depression and stories from reconstructing after World War II. So it's really a fascinating book. I like that it's written by a pagan, so it's got practical information, and it's also got rituals, and it speaks my language, basically. And so it's really awesome when you can find stuff that's got everything in it that you love. Oh, we need some Lord of the Rings references now. Actually, wait, she did have some Lord of the Rings references in there. What am I talking about? She did, when she was talking about your sanctuary. She was talking about how you envisioned your sanctuary. There were Lord of the Rings references. I take it back. This book is perfect in all ways. Okay, I'm done. I've had too much caffeine while I was studying for chemistry. I'm sorry. You can't see up my nose, can you? Like I said, I think our culture really likes to ignore, quote-unquote, depressing topics. Whenever a serious topic comes up, I've had many people shut me down by saying, oh, don't think about that. Positive energy, Amanda, positive energy. Like, literally glossing over it, which is literally the definition of toxic positivity. But that doesn't make these issues go away. Manifesting is a thing, but that does not make those issues go away. That's ignoring a real problem. But hey, let's just be positive and ignore something. You can't fix something if you don't talk about it. So, like I said, for us kids that are autumn born, those are the phrases he used for those who are in the generation of autumn or raised in winter, born in autumn. All we've ever known is the world getting darker. And to realize that this is part of a cycle and that the world is going to get better is extremely hopeful. Like, we have it's probably going to get a little bit worse for a while, but there's actually a light at the tunnel. I think it's actually really hopeful. I'm hoping personally that the pandemic leads to universal health care in America eventually. I'm hoping it leads to a restructure of certain things that we need that are just not working. And by the way, in case you didn't know, the whole reason we have health insurance is because during World War II, President Roosevelt put a moratorium on wage increases. You could not get a wage during World War II. And so in order to draw new workers to new jobs, employers had to draw people without saying, you'll get higher pay here. So the way that they did that was health insurance, that you and your family could get medical care, which, seems great. But then after World War II, all that health insurance structure was still there. And so that's actually an example of something that was put into place during the last winter cycle that was supposed to be a temporary measure that then we had to deal with in spring, which maybe wasn't the best idea. And I think this winter, we should be getting rid of it. And I hope it's obvious that I'm talking about cultural winter about this crisis point. Because if we were actually trying to destroy health insurance in one winter, in 1 year, that would be really, really bad. Like, not enough time. But I think we could by 2030. So there we go. Amanda for president, universal health care by 2030. That's a joke. I do not want to be president. Don't vote for me. Have a nice night, guys. Amanda, Artemis of Forrester, rune reader, diviner, polytheist, mystic, pre-nursing student. I don't sleep. Have a nice night.